Greetings and welcome to our channel, where we post short and long scary stories for your entertainment. And so, without any further delays, let's dive into today's story. The Chill of the North. The gnawing chill of the northern Appalachians seeped through Louis's Gore-Tex jacket, a stark contrast to the warm, recycled air of his city apartment. Beside him, Mark, his oldest friend and colleague, exhaled a puff of fog, his breath catching in the frigid night. Their neighbor, Liam, a burly helicopter pilot with a perpetual twinkle in his eye, was already fiddling with the campfire, coaxing reluctant sparks from the damp kindling. Their guide, John, a park ranger whose face was etched with the ruggedness of the wilderness, stood a little apart, his gaze sweeping the impenetrable wall of pines that surrounded their makeshift campsite. The flickering fire cast dancing shadows, turning familiar trees into monstrous silhouettes. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Mark said, his voice trying to inject a lightness that the oppressive silence of the woods refused to acknowledge. Louis grunted. Beautiful was not the word he'd use. Eerie. Foreboding. The kind of place where things whispered and rustled in the periphery, where the darkness felt alive. He was an engineer, accustomed to the predictable logic of concrete and steel. This was a different kind of logic, primal and untamed. John, without turning, responded, "It's wild, and wild doesn't care if you find it beautiful." His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. Liam finally coaxed a decent flame to life, and the four men gathered around its meager warmth. Liam, ever the storyteller, launched into a tale of a daring rescue he'd performed in these very mountains, his voice laced with dramatic pauses and exaggerated sound effects. Mark chuckled, the sound a little too loud in the stillness. Louis offered a forced smile, his eyes still drawn to the inky blackness beyond the firelight. John remained by the edge of the fire's glow, his stance relaxed but alert. He'd been unusually quiet since they'd entered the deeper woods, his usual affable demeanor replaced by a watchful intensity. He'd explained their route, their safety precautions, and the general rules of respectful wilderness conduct. But there was an unspoken layer to his guidance, a subtle tension that had begun to prickle at Louis's nerves. As the night deepened, so did the sounds of the forest. Twigs snapped, leaves rustled, the mournful hoot of an owl echoed through the trees. Each sound, amplified by the darkness and their isolation, seemed to carry a threat. Louis found himself jumping at every rustle, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Just the wind," Mark murmured, sensing Louis's unease. "Or a deer. Nothing to worry about." But Louis wasn't so sure. There was a weight to the silence between the sounds, a stillness that felt pregnant with anticipation. He noticed John watching the trees too, his head cocked, listening to something beyond their comprehension. Around midnight, the party began to thin. Liam, after a few rounds of exaggerated campfire stories and a shared flask of something potent, declared himself ready for sleep. Mark, not far behind, yawned and stretched, suggesting they turn in. Louis, though weary, felt a strange reluctance to close his eyes, a primal instinct urging him to remain vigilant. John, however, seemed to be preparing for a longer night. He added more wood to the fire, tending to it with a practiced hand, and then unslung a sturdy-looking rifle from his shoulder. The metallic click, as he loaded a round, sent a shiver down Louis's spine. "Just a precaution," John said, his eyes meeting Louis's for a fleeting moment. His expression was unreadable. "Wildlife can be unpredictable out here, especially after dark." Louis swallowed, the dry air catching in his throat. He glanced at Mark and Liam, already dozing in their sleeping bags, their faces relaxed in slumber. They seemed oblivious to the mounting unease that had settled over Louis like a shroud. He tried to dismiss his fear as city-bred paranoia. He was a rational man. This was just a forest. But the primal fear that had been simmering within him all evening began to boil. He felt watched, not by the usual curious eyes of woodland creatures, but by something ancient, something predatory, a low growl, deeper and more guttural than any animal he'd ever heard, rip through the night. It wasn't the sound of a bear or a wolf. It was something else, something that vibrated in Louis's very bones. Mark stirred, a soft grunt escaping his lips. Liam remained deeply asleep, oblivious. John, however, was instantly on his feet, the rifle held steady, his eyes scanning the darkness. "What was that?" Mark whispered, his voice hoarse with sleep and sudden fear. "Stay put," John commanded, his voice low and urgent. "Both of you." The growl came again, closer this time, accompanied by the heavy thud of something moving through the undergrowth. It was not a delicate tread. It was a powerful, deliberate stride. Lewis's breath hitched. He could feel the hairs on his arms standing on end. The fire, which had seemed so comforting moments before, now felt like a beacon, illuminating them, making them vulnerable. Then a shadow detached itself from the dense wall of trees. It was too large to be a deer, too loping to be a bear. It moved with an unnatural gait, its silhouette hulking and menacing against the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy. Lewis's mind scrambled for a rational explanation. A large coyote, a mountain lion, but the sheer size, the sheer wrongness of its movement defied all logical categorization. John raised the rifle, his movements economical and precise. "Get behind me," he ordered, his voice tight. Mark, now fully awake, scrambled closer to the fire, his eyes wide with terror. Liam finally stirred, blinking groggily, then his eyes widened in disbelief as he saw the approaching shape. The creature let out a long, mournful howl, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality. It was a sound of hunger, of primal ferocity, and of something ancient and deeply unsettling. Then it moved. It wasn't a charge, not yet, but a steady, relentless approach. Louis could make out glints of eyes and light reflecting the firelight with a malevolent gleam. He could see the outline of a powerful muzzle, the suggestion of sharp teeth. "What in God's name is that?" Liam breathed, his usual swagger completely evaporated. "It's a werewolf," John said, his voice devoid of emotion, as if stating a simple fact. The word hung in the air, heavy and chilling. Werewolf. It was a creature of myth, of nightmares. Louis, the engineer, the man of logic, felt a scream clawing at his throat. This was impossible. This couldn't be happening. Yet the guttural snarls growing louder, the earth trembling beneath the creature's massive paws, the sheer terror radiating from John were undeniably real. The werewolf lunged. John fired. The crack of the rifle was deafening, echoing through the silent woods. A guttural yelp, a sound of pain and surprise, escaped the creature. It stumbled, but did not fall. It was wounded, but not incapacitated. "Run!" John roared, shoving Mark and Liam towards the deeper woods, away from the fire. Louis, paralyzed by a mixture of terror and disbelief, found himself pushed by John's firm hand. They plunged into the darkness, the firelight receding behind them, the sounds of the werewolf's enraged roars pursuing them. Branches whipped at their faces, unseen roots threatened to trip them, but the primal instinct for survival propelled them forward. Louis stumbled, catching himself on a rough tree trunk. He risked a glance back. The werewolf, a hulking mass of fur and sinew, was silhouetted against the dying embers of their campfire, its eyes fixed on them. It was faster than it looked, its powerful legs carrying it through the dense undergrowth with terrifying speed. John was a blur behind them, reloading his rifle as he ran. He was their only hope, their only shield against this monstrous reality. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs ached, the cacophony of the werewolf's pursuit a constant, terrifying soundtrack. The forest seemed to close in around them, a labyrinth of shadows and fear. Liam, surprisingly agile for his size, was leading the way, his pilot's instincts for navigation kicking in. Mark, usually the most athletic, was panting heavily, his face a mask of pure terror. Louis, fueled by a surge of adrenaline he didn't know he possessed, kept pace, his mind a whirlwind of disbelief and a desperate hope for escape. Suddenly, Liam skidded to a halt, holding up a hand. "Stop!" he hissed. They listened. The sounds of the werewolf's pursuit had seemingly stopped too. An unnerving silence descended, broken only by their own ragged breaths. "Where is it?" Mark panted, his voice trembling. John, who had caught up, raised his rifle, his gaze sweeping the impenetrable darkness. "It's trying to flank us," he whispered. "It's smart, cunning." Lewis's heart hammered. They were trapped. The woods, which had seemed so vast and untamed, now felt like a cage. A rustling sound, much closer than before, erupted from their right. Then, from their left, the werewolf was circling them, playing with them. "We need to get to the ranger station," John said, his voice grim. "It's about a mile from here. It's more defensible." He pointed in a direction that looked no different from any other patch of darkness. "This way. Stay close. Don't make a sound." They moved as a single, terrified unit, the hunter becoming the hunted. Each snap of a twig, each whisper of the wind sent jolts of fear through Lewis. He could feel the presence of the werewolf, a palpable threat lurking just beyond the veil of darkness. They moved through the woods with a newfound desperation, their senses heightened to an almost unbearable degree. Luis imagined the creature's hot breath on his neck, its claws tearing at his flesh. Then, a guttural roar, closer than ever, erupted from behind them. It was a sound of pure rage, of thwarted pursuit. It was gaining on them. John fired again, the shot echoing through the trees. A sickening thud followed, and then a howl of pain. But the creature was still coming. Luis risked another glance. Through a break in the trees, he saw it. It was a horrifying spectacle. The werewolf, a massive lupine beast, was on all fours, its fur matted and dark, its eyes burning with a feral light. But it was its face that was truly terrifying. It was a grotesque mockery of a human visage, twisted into a rictus of pain and fury. And then it happened. Liam, in his panic, tripped over a root and went sprawling. He cried out, a sharp, involuntary sound. The werewolf's head snapped around, its attention immediately drawn to the sound. It was too close, far too close. "Liam!" Mark screamed. The werewolf lunged at Liam, its massive jaws opening in a terrifying display of razor-sharp teeth. John fired, but the shot went wide. Luis watched, frozen in horror, as the beast tore into Liam. The sounds were horrific, a symphony of tearing flesh and bone. Liam's screams were abruptly cut short. Mark let out a strangled cry, and in a surge of primal rage and grief, grabbed a heavy fallen branch and charged at the werewolf. "Mark, no!" John yelled, but it was too late. Mark, a civilized man, an accountant, was now a warrior of desperation, wildly swinging the branch at the monstrous creature. The werewolf, momentarily distracted from its gruesome meal, turned its attention to Mark. John seized the opportunity. He fired again, this time with deadly accuracy, aiming for the beast's head. A sickening crunch echoed through the woods. The werewolf staggered, a dark, viscous fluid dripping from its wound. It let out a final, agonizing roar, a sound that seemed to drain all the life from the forest, and then collapsed. Silence descended, absolute and heavy. The only sound was the ragged, desperate breathing of the three survivors. Louis slowly lowered himself to the ground, his legs incapable of supporting him. His mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the horror he had just witnessed. Liam was gone. Mark, his best friend, was a blood-soaked mess, his eyes vacant with shock and despair. John stood, his rifle smoking, his face a mask of grim exhaustion and profound sadness. The darkness of the northern Appalachians pressed in on them, no longer just an absence of light, but a suffocating blanket of grief and terror. The wilderness, which they had sought for a weekend of escape, had shown them its true, terrifying face. And it was a face Louis knew he would never forget. The engineer, the pilot, the accountant, none of them had been prepared for what lurked in the heart of the woods. And as the first hint of dawn began to filter through the oppressive canopy, Louis knew that their lives, like the shattered remnants of their campsite, would never be the same. So, did you like our story? If so, then please subscribe to our channel. It'll help us and motivate us to create more content. And thank you for listening.